Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolf's bane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Welcome to another special edition of Ghoul Radio, the Pack of Phantoms. I am your host, Rob Cortez. I remember being 9 years old, and we're going back to 1996 on this one. I was watching the film Bad Moon. The scene starts out with a couple having sex inside a tent, when suddenly a werewolf comes out of nowhere, and the woman is dragged out from the tent, and the werewolf dismembers her. The guy is also hurt pretty bad. And suddenly you hear a gunshot, and the werewolf's head explodes. Spoiler alert, the guy eventually turns into a werewolf. What freaked me out the most was his transformation into the beast. And I say beast because the makeup was so realistic back then. The eyes, the teeth, the way he transformed really scared me as a kid. I guess I got so freaked out, I did not want to see another werewolf movie. But obviously I did. Present day. Weeks ago, I began researching about werewolves. And the one word I could use to sum them up is barbaric. A being that can't be controlled. A being who lacks reasoning and is simply motivated by their instincts. So now, we take a deep dive, with the help of an expert this time, into the legend of where the sometimes two-footed monster comes from. So grab a snack or a beer just like me, and sit tight. Turn up your volume, and learn a thing or two about the origins of the werewolf. It might, just might, keep you safe into the next full moon. The term werewolf comes from the Old English word were, which translates to man and wolf. They appear in various cultures. A vicious shapeshifter that has an appetite for man and beast alike. Immune to most physical attacks. There are many ways to become a werewolf, such as being cursed by a sorcerer, wearing magic clothing, drinking a potion, drinking water from a wolf's paw, sleeping under a full moon, having werewolf parents, and most commonly, being bitten by one and surviving. You are forever cursed, immune from age and disease, and a thirst to ravage the innocent for food. A werewolf's kryptonite is a silver bullet. Spiritually, silver is considered a pure metal, and werewolves are impure creatures. Silver is considered toxic and harmful, causing negative effects like metal poisoning and making a werewolf go into shock. And now, our special guest. Tell us a little bit about yourself to the Ghouliacs.
Yes, I'm David Delbar. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago in classics and comparative literature. And I am among other things, I study werewolves in literature and film.
I read your biography, and it says that you're an amateur lycanthropologist. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I kind of coined the term myself. But an anthropologist is, someone who studies humans. So a lycanthropologist would be someone who studies werewolves. So I study werewolves in culture, in myths and legends, literature, film, toys, comics, anywhere I can find werewolves, I try to figure out why humans are telling these stories, what the werewolf is doing in the situation, and why humans are just so fascinated with werewolves.
David, can you tell us the difference between a werewolf and a lycanthrope?
Strictly speaking, they're the same thing. It's different languages. Lycanthrope is from the Greek, So we have lukos, which is wolf, and anthropos, which is human. Werewolf is coming from probably the sort of Middle English wer, which is man, specifically a male, and ulf, or wolf, which is the sort of idea for wolf. And this is actually interestingly enough, the civilized wolf. There's another word, varg, which if you are a fan of J.R. Tolkien and has the wargs, the wolves that sort of come and attack. Those are the wild, savage wolves. So yeah, basically werewolf, lycanthrope, they both mean man-wolf, and are just to represent the sort of dual nature of werewolves.
Why did you study werewolves?
I've always loved werewolves. Growing up as a kid, I watched the old Goosebumps TV show with the werewolf episode, the Werewolf of Fever Swamp, and just sort of enchanted with this idea that we humans could become an animal and sort of enjoy this new experience in the woods, in nature. And I was kind of a strange kid growing up, and that sort of strangeness of the werewolf spoke to me. And then as I, went into studying literature, I just sort of kept that love of werewolves alive, and just sort of kept a running list of different werewolf stories, read scholarship on it, eventually taught a class on werewolves, and it was just a really wonderful aspect of study for me.
David, how would you define a werewolf?
Well, I usually define a werewolf as broadly as possible. So a human that can change into a wolf or has been turned into a wolf, sometimes a wolf that turns into a human. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, right? There's some that are fully wolf. There are some that are on bipedal. There are the sort of man wolf with just a bit of extra facial hair and some extra sharp teeth. And then there's many different kinds. Some even that are just humans that behave like wolves, and the sort of psychiatric sort of manifestation of that. So I sort of look at all of that broadly and think werewolf, right? This sort of intersection and overlapping of and touching of human and wolf. But some people are much more strict and only think about, the sort of like, it has to transform or shift and it has to look a certain way. But they're all precious to me. So,
how does one teach a class about werewolves?
Well, to teach a college course, you typically need to be, have a PhD or getting a PhD.
Wow.
But what I do is comparative literature. So what that field does is look at many different cultures and try to find points of similarity or contact or contrast, look at influence, and we can do that in a number of different ways. One is sort of called thematology, which looks at a particular kind of story and to watch how it changes through time and through place. So I went to the committee that decides classes at the university. I said, I want to teach a course on werewolves, and I gave them a whole bunch of text. At first I had very sophisticated text. I was like, we're going to do the high German romantic poet Goethe and Freud and psychological stuff. And then they said, make it fun. Pick fun werewolf text. So we watched some werewolf films and read some novels, and we tried to look at the werewolf in lots and lots of different ways. So gender and sexuality, race, we looked at psychological horror, we looked at medieval sort of stories about them, really just a really broad scope of werewolf stuff all across time and place.
What is the oldest werewolf myth in literature that you know of?
So the oldest one that I've been able to find is actually in our very first sort of story that we have recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's about 5,000 years old or so. And it's basically the goddess Ishtar. The hero Gilgamesh is reciting all of her past lovers, and one is of a farmer that she dated briefly. And when she got tired of him, rather than just having an awkward conversation, she turned him into a wolf. And he was chased off of his own farm by his sons and their dogs. So that is the sort of first written account that I can think of a human being transformed into a wolf. And it really sort of already has these ideas of alienation from society as a sort of curse or punishment, in this case sort of inflicted by a god. And it's that sort of motif continues along through a lot of different versions that come afterwards. Later on, there's a myth in Roman times that is told in Petronius. Basically, two men are walking along, and it's dark. One of them decides that he's going to go off from the road and says, just continue on without me. The other guy sort of like peeks back and looks though, and the first man has taken off all of his clothes and peed around them in a circle, from which we get the Latin word circumingere, which is to mean to pee in a circle. And the clothes that are left behind have been turned to stone. So the first guy's freaking out. He runs to the place he was going, and when he gets there, the people say, "Oh, you just missed this wolf that came and attacked one person and tried to eat some of the sheep." I'm paraphrasing wildly here, for details may differ in the written text, but basically the man says, "Oh, I knew that this must be the same wolf that I just saw transform." Fortunately, it injured the wolf, and when the next day he went to his friend's house and he saw that the friend had the same injury where the wolf had supposedly been hit. So he knew, of course, that this person had been the werewolf. That is pretty much the extent of the story. And that story ends up getting repeated many times in folk stories all over Europe for hundreds of years.
As far as North America, I live in South Texas. Is there a border werewolf?
We have a few legends or sort of tales of sightings of wolf-like creatures. The Beast of Bray Road is probably the most famous, although that's not in Texas.
Yeah, no.
We've got, let's see, if we're going further south, Aztec legends have this idea of the Nagual, which is a shapeshifter who is more kind of like a malevolent witch, similar to the idea of skinwalkers in Navajo and legends in that area. So that the sort of native ideas of it are sort of this malignant witch that, among other things, can shapeshift, always to sort of work mischief. We have a lot of the American werewolf stories earlier, before we started making films, were sort of all in a magazine called Weird Tales, sort of this pulp fiction stories that were about people's encounter with strange creatures, and stories that sort of about the werewolf that they found there all over America. So those vary widely. Some are set in Europe, some are set in America. A lot of times we have like Russian princesses coming over that are werewolves in those stories, and they're in the West, and they're sort of out of place, and no one really knows what to do with this foreign person, and it turns out that they're a werewolf, and they come and attack. But the sort of border between Mexico and the United States really does speak in a way to the werewolf, because they are a creature that crosses borders. They cross from animal to human and back again. They cross sort of from the edge outside in the forest into the city and back again. And certainly there have been people that have seen that as threatening and dangerous. And that's sort of always the horror element of the werewolf. There's this fear of invasion or contamination. But you also have people that have identified with this sort of boundary transgression and said, this is actually very similar to how I live my life. And they see the werewolf as something that is, aspirational or mythical or magical even. The sort of Chicana scholar Gloria Zaldúa has this idea of the nepantlero, this creature that crosses between boundaries and sort of lives in the in-between. And so werewolves are kind of like that. They are part of both societies, and not neither, sort of accepted in neither, but they also have this power to bring this sort of wild energy, this creative potential into society that would otherwise be stagnant. So there's where the werewolf is feared, but it also serves this vital part in society. So you'll have the horror aspect if you're from the inside city looking out and the werewolf is coming to get you. But you also have the kindly werewolf or the misunderstood werewolf, sort of perspective if you're going from the outside in.
Can you name your top 3 favorite werewolf movies?
Yeah, I can name 3, sure. I really like, one is a sort of weird one to put in. It's actually an anime series called Wolf's Rain that takes place in a sort of post-apocalypse with wolves trying to survive and make it to their paradise. There's, American Werewolf in London is truly a classic. It's hard to go wrong with that one. And third one, I'll go with Ginger Snaps.
And finally, do you believe in werewolves, David?
So, I wear a lot of different hats, as a werewolf scholar, as a lycanthropologist. If I put on my science hat and I will have to say, I've seen no scientific evidence that werewolves exist, in the physical, tangible world. If new evidence comes out that they do, I will be very thrilled. But if I take off my scientist hat and put on, my spiritualist hat or my sort of anthropology hat, it's like, of course they do, right? Humans have not fully separated from animals. We have not given up the forest. All of these sort of fears and hopes and aspirations, they are all sort of still inside of us, and they come out in our stories about werewolves. When we are afraid of the dark, when we are afraid that some animal is going to eat us, and we realize that all of our guns and technology and everything that we think keeps us human and in check isn't actually as solid as we may hope it was, and the beast comes out. I think that there is this sort of aspect, this metaphorical or spiritual aspect of the werewolf that will always be with humans.
Thank you so much, David, for being part of this episode. It's so cool to talk to someone who not only loves werewolves, but teaches a class of werewolves. With the knowledge David shared, let's take a deeper dive into the stories he mentioned and other versions of werewolves that we found. Not only is the Epic of Gilgamesh one of the oldest stories, but in our research, we found the story of a man-to-animal transformation in Greek mythology. It's the story of King Lycaon of Arcadia, who killed and cooked his son, Nidamus, and served him to Zeus, to see whether the god was all-knowing to recognize human flesh. Disgusted, Zeus transformed Lycan into a wolf, while Nidamus was brought back to life. That's a pretty old legend. Another story, way past the Greek era, is a story I heard on a podcast called Camp Cryptid, where the host talked about the Morbach monster. Based in the 1800s, Morbach is a place near the town of Wittlich, Germany. Supposedly, Wittlich is the last known town where a werewolf was killed. There's a shrine just outside of the town where a candle always burns. Legend has it that if the candle ever goes out, the werewolf will return. Fast forward to another story David mentioned. This one is less than 100 years old. The Beast of Bray Road. So Ghouliacs, if you're trying to see a werewolf, this is closer to home. The story goes, a cryptid was first seen in Elkhorn, Wisconsin in the 1930s. Its features include being around 6 feet tall with a gray or brown fur. Its face resembles a wolf with shiny yellow eyes and pointed ears. Its body, though furry, looks like a muscular man, and it's pretty fast. It was recently seen in the 1980s and 90s. Some people believe it to be a werewolf, others maybe Bigfoot. But lastly, they believe it to be an unidentified species. Well, that's a wrap, Ghouliacs. Thank you for tuning in to the special edition of Ghoul Radio, The Pack of Phantoms. I especially want to thank David Delbar for his expertise on this furry creature. We have found the silver lining over a complicated entity. We tracked down numerous books and films about werewolves, scratching the surface of a deep lore, where I transformed, now howling more knowledge of this transformative beast. I became hungrier to learn more about the lycanthrope. In the end, I guess you could say that there's a werewolf inside all of us. For all my lone wolves out there, I hope this episode can keep you company. Finally, if you're not listening to Ghoul Radio and now watching it, it'd be a lot cooler if you did. Till next time, Ghouliacs.